This is Faith Over Breakfast, Season 3, Episode 6.
Hey, welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Andy Littleton from Mission Church in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm sitting here with, most importantly, Bryan Betz.
Bryan Betz.
And
Not
Eric.
most importantly.
And
Bryan
Eric
Betz.
Seepin from the
Crowd goes
Village
wild.
Church.
In the context
Tucson,
of Faith Over Breakfast,
Arizona.
I'm least important.
And Bryan is going to be called on making negative
He
jokes
is
about
the
himself.
greatest of all because he is
Starting
the
right.
least of all.
Goodness.
Bryan is so. Here's the thing with Bryan. Here's why. If you are listening to this and you're going, why does this podcast exist? This is a great podcast to listen to. If you're listening to it and you're like, I want to know a little bit more about why these two pastors do what they do, this is a great podcast to listen to because Bryan is our most faithful listener. I think we can officially say that. And Bryan was once the host of the show, and he has been out of the country for a couple years, and he here is asking us about this journey, about how the podcast has been, about why we do it, why we decide to do it the way we do it,
Right.
stuff like that.
It's pretty meandering, and I would
It's
suggest you listen to it at 1.5 speed so you can kind of just walk through some of the stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yes.
'Cause half speed would probably sound pretty drunk, so that would also be humorous.
So Eric just suggested that you speed up this podcast.
Or
But
slow
it's
it down.
but
one of
it's
the two.
no, if you're interested in us specifically, in our relationship in this podcast and how it's affected our community, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, all that kind of stuff, this is a good one. So enjoy, tune in, and thank you, Bryan, for hosting it.
You're welcome.
Hey!
Welcome. One little technical change. It happens to stupid USB, man. They just mess with you every time.
Yeah.
You're going to have to love and kiss the mic.
Okay.
Yeah, what does USB stand for? You stupid brontosaurus.
You stupid Bryan.
That's not where. There you go. He said it, not me.
So we're jumping into this because
Right,
the
'cause
intro
there's-
comes later. I always forget that.
It's your idea.
It was my idea.
Yeah.
So anyway,
And now we can't stop it. 'Cause
moving on.
It's an institution.
Yep, that's right. So in local news in Phoenix, I believe yesterday, one of the rides at the Arizona State Fair, one of the big, huge ones that spins people around way up in the sky, got stuck. And
that's
people were
scary.
hanging upside down for over 6 minutes until they could get it down.
That would be really scary.
Yeah.
I would be happy to be down.
Do you so the question to get us going today is, do you like those kind of rides usually?
No. Okay.
And how does what I just shared impact your feelings?
It doesn't.
Doesn't impact you aren't less interested in them now than
I
you
would
are?
never go on them, and so therefore
You would never go on them.
I would never go on them.
So what does that tell us about the Village?
A lot. It's a low-risk church.
A low risk church. Okay. Bryan, how about you? Do you like to go on these kind of rides, and how does that information I just shared?
It's almost the same answer because it doesn't change. But I've always been someone that's just give me the most extreme thing and I want to do it. Now that's also me speaking like, oh yeah, my young self was like, I'm gonna do everything.
Wait, how old are you now?
I'm 28 now.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
been over a decade.
You're old.
Yeah, it's been over a decade since I've been on a roller coaster. So I feel like if I'm
Decade.
yeah.
He's old. He could say he has a decade.
You're old when you can talk about decades having gone
I know.
by.
Decades gone by.
Next month, the day after my birthday, I have my 10-year high school reunion. That's
Wow.
crazy to me.
Wow,
Yeah.
10 years ago, you were in high school.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you going?
I am.
Wow.
I'm really looking forward to
Did you go to yours, Eric?
Nope.
Neither did I.
Do I really want to see those people? Nope.
Wow, that's so loving and pastoral.
Yep.
Love you.
I want to put in
What does that say about
peas and
what does that say about the Village?
not loving at all.
Once you're gone, we'll never have anything to do with you.
Ouch.
Well, I don't think that's
he's
true.
made a commitment to his community. Like he wants to know where.
Unlike he did at his high school.
Well, I mean,
I was young, immature,
Yeah, and forced to go.
and forced to go. I didn't want to be in high school. Who wants to be in high school?
Pastor Eric Seepin is a famous podcaster. They know who he is and
Everybody
where he is.
knows who I am.
There's no point in going.
If they want to reconnect with him, they'll go to the Village Church.
Or go to listen to my podcast. Everybody can connect with me.
Exactly.
Wow.
Posted every Tuesday.
This is changing from Faith Over Breakfast to Faith with Eric.
Faith with Eric. And he'll never speak to either of us again once
That's
we're
right.
gone. There will be no reunion.
That's when we'll
of
get
Faith
the
Over Breakfast.
advertising too, is when the two of you are gone.
So here's what we're doing today. So Bryan, who's here, if you are a Deep Cuts listener to Faith Over Breakfast and you listened back in the day, Bryan was he started off the podcast with us, and he was like a host that we realized maybe we didn't have to have a host eventually. Like that kind of dawned on us, like a host. I probably took away from the fact that it was like just a casual breakfast conversation.
Yeah.
But it was like none of us knew how to do any of this, and you were very much a part of our early journey, helped us get started our little website, took pictures of us and stuff. When
I got an email recently in regards to saying
yes.
there's a misspelling or something like that.
A misspelling?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And payment rejection.
Who did that? Yeah. That one was a little more concerning.
Oh wait.
Well, let's figure this out later. But Bryan, if you've enjoyed our website, which I
Bryan
think
is now
you
fully
should,
read, everybody,
because
fully 3
different
shades different.
Because the website looks really nice. That was all Bryan Betz.
Thank you, Bryan Betz.
And then Bryan's been he's been in Korea, the Air Force, which is one of his top favorite podcasting topics, is to talk about how he's in the military, which we discovered is not the case. There is still a podcast that has not been shared that is about Bryan that was actually really good.
I don't even know where that podcast is.
I don't know anymore. And Bryan is happy about that because he does not want...
I don't mind doing another podcast and it being about me, but I feel like since I haven't been the host for basically 2 years, then it's like, was it even worth it? Nobody knows me anymore. Not that he did anyway.
Yeah. Okay, you're not allowed to make those kind of negative jokes about yourself.
Sorry.
He can make them all he wants.
No, he and I have a deal.
We
have a deal. We have a deal. So,
do you get money for?
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
we're gonna add that in. Where you have to pay me when you make a
negative comment.
How about I pay for the website?
Okay,
Faith Over Breakfast.
That works. That works. But you got to get on that because we're getting emails about how it's deficient. Something's wrong.
No, it's just updating you like, hey, you're about to be charged.
Yeah.
So I'm not late on any payments. I was on time for a payment. Just kidding.
So Bryan, also being the genuinely nice guy that he is, despite all the things
let's
he says about himself, but he bought a book of mine in my Indiegogo campaign. And there were options of people could do extra layers of support, and Bryan did that, and got a podcast, as did Ray, who was on not too long ago, as did Rod, who was on not too long ago.
Yeah, so basically, Andy has been using Faith Over Breakfast for his own means.
Yeah, I've found a way to that was the most effective upgrade. I thought only one person went for the flannel, the Made in USA flannel that I hand picked and sought after in the thrift stores of Oregon. Only one person went for that.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. My expectation was, and I thought this was true about it, but
you got everything.
Yeah, you pay for the higher one and you get everything lower, and that's how a lot of those even work.
Yes.
Is like
you got to read the fine print, man. You got to read the
fine
print.
I'm kind of confused too. Like,
so you were like, I'm getting
I'll show you
I'm
after.
I'm getting a flannel. I'm getting a book. I'm getting a framed art piece. I'm getting
I don't know about the framed art piece. I think that it was more of like specifically, and maybe I bought it twice then because I did. My expectation was not the flannel, not the art piece, but I was like, okay, the pre-reading, like reading all together, and hosting the podcast. But I would hope that since I'm returned, not that I would officially rejoin because I love the dynamic you guys have, and I feel like I served a role figuring that out. And then you transition, and it got so much better after not as a detriment to me, but I just love the dynamic you guys have.
You owe me money for that one.
No, I think that's fair.
Okay,
I think he qualified it. He's not saying that it was about him.
Okay,
I served a purpose, and I think that it was. I was honored to be a part of it for such a long time.
We need a train though.
Yeah, there was a train that would go by every time Bryan was trying to make a point,
Yeah.
and then the best part, and we referred to this back when we did our 100th episode, and we remembered our first one, right? Was that the first time Bryan came, he had run his car accidentally off the side of the road into a ditch because he fell asleep. He stood up from the wreckage and walked, right? To the podcast, and you were still on the podcast. How did you get there?
So it was halfway through my shift, and then I kept working, and I finished work, and then I was able to get a ride to.
You got a ride. So Bryan's car is in the ditch, not resolved, but he's on the podcast on our first episode, and we discovered this in the middle. We went, are you serious? Anyway,
so yeah, so
if anybody's been dedicated,
yeah, he's been dedicated, and I'd also like to say, Andy, that. But the guy who thinks we shouldn't have small talk at the beginning of our podcast.
We just did an awful lot of small talk.
You were going off. You had small talk questions to bring us into this podcast.
Yep. Well, there you go.
So what is the purpose of this podcast? Because
Bryan,
we didn't get any texts. We didn't text back and
Bryan,
forth.
And I told you about it last week.
I know you
but
did.
Bryan paid for this podcast, so he has questions for us.
It's weird. I didn't see any of that money.
You have in subtle ways.
In subtle ways.
Yeah, you have. All of the millions of listeners that have come because of my book are indirectly tied to that money.
Well, I'd like just to say that our Jordan Peterson podcast has hit 264 listens, which is almost 100 more listens than all of our podcasts. Rob Bell hit 171.
So what we need to do is just name podcasts after semi-controversial figures.
That's right.
What was worship at?
Worship has started to go down, but Bible reading is like number 3 now.
Yeah, I remember Bible reading was high.
Yeah, Bible reading is high.
The other thing about Bryan is Bryan has actually listened to all of our podcasts
3 times.
3 times.
At minimum.
And has been quoting. So Bryan's living in my house right now.
Yes. That is part of signing, paying for your book is the roommate.
Yeah. And cleaning the toilets. But we didn't talk about that yet, but that's part of it. But I have been quoted. He has quoted our podcast to me in the last week.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I've gone.
He's a true disciple of Faith Over Breakfast. So I hear he has questions for us.
He has questions.
We better get those if we're going to say anything
Bryan,
important.
our true disciple, has questions.
All right.
That's what this is about.
Bryan Disciple.
Bryan.
Yes. So
you got the floor.
Thank you. I
the
appreciate
table.
it.
Just if you have to make a point, don't pound the metal table or it'll echo.
I will be very careful not to pound the metal table.
Like that.
Yeah,
yes, that was Andy, not me.
Just saying.
No, I appreciate you letting me know because I use my hands a lot, so I will avoid doing that. Okay, so one of the things I loved and missed about the podcast in the early days was the conversations that actually happened before and after the podcast.
Sure.
Is there a conversation you remember before or after recording that you wish was on the podcast?
I don't remember any of them.
No, I don't remember any of them.
No, I totally, I totally figured that as well.
And do you remember one that you'd like us to remember?
I've really enjoyed them a lot. I mean, a lot of times it was banter, and a lot of times was just like advice to me that would not be appropriate for me to share.
Right.
But so there's also that. So
like about wearing not such short shorts.
Yeah. So here's the thing I like about the podcast is when there is banter. I think if my community, at least, they're always like, "Oh, the banter's fun." I don't.
Yeah.
Andy does not. He thinks we need to dive right into the conversation.
Yeah.
I really enjoy the banter, but I understand and this is actually a kind of follow question. I think originally the hope of the podcast was to have a sort of area of casual.
Yeah.
And not to be unprofessional, but to have just a regular sit-down conversation.
This is the conversation we would have over breakfast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that would be banter and small talk. And I still experience that as I listen to it today.
Okay. So it's still there.
For sure.
Andy just can't resist, even though he wants to.
But I know as you've gotten more comfortable on the mic and just on this podcast, you've considered what are the ways that we can make this professional. One of those, this setup is gorgeous. I love this setup.
Thank you.
It's basically a model of one that's set up at his work.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Is this kind of your permanent home, and sometimes you go over there?
There was some little, every once in a while, a Harley would drive by at my place. So here we don't have that environmental issue. Plus, it's close to my house too.
And it saves us some recording, steps, because we were mobily recording and then transferring it up onto Dropbox, and then I would download it into my system. Now it just goes directly in, and we
So this works, but we do have another setup if we need. So it's pretty much just the same.
Yep.
I know that your wife in particular loves the banter.
Yes, she does like the banter.
Does your wife listen to it?
I don't think so.
My wife, by the way, she doesn't listen as much.
It's awesome.
She listens probably half the time, but what she likes more than anything is the banter when we put it on half speed and put it in the car when we're traveling around.
Really?
Because it sounds like we're drunk. It's hilarious. It is like some of the best. Some of the best.
I think it's worth it. Especially the early episodes, like just go back and listen to it at half speed. And
It's just like a bunch of drunk guys going.
Yeah. For the days that we're like, I don't need to think right now. I don't need to like have deep thoughts.
Drunk over breakfast.
Drunk over breakfast. That's a good alternative. You can have 2 podcasts.
Yeah.
We do tequila shots and talk about Jesus.
Is there anything about that first year of podcasting that you miss?
The food.
Yeah, the food.
Yeah, Exo coffees.
Coffee.
Their food was great.
Their scones were amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I miss that. You, I hate to even tell you this, but Bryan told me, and this was like like a form of torture. I think like the military's done something to him, because he goes, "Hey, I was thinking I could go over to Exo Coffee and get the food that we used to eat and bring it over, but I don't have time." Like what?
It wasn't time. I was too tired to drive.
Okay.
I was too tired.
And we don't want your car to end up in a ditch again.
I know. I'm trying to be wise.
That was for this podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wouldn't that have been great?
Well, I kind of think he's kind of gone down a notch in the disciple.
Yeah.
So one of my thoughts was to do it next week instead, but
okay. Well,
I'll gladly still do that. That'd be fun, and it'd be like, oh, cool, eating a savory sandwich and having my cortada. Is that what you guys?
But the cortado, though, here's the thing: the cortado that has traveled 30 minutes across the city is not a cortado. Not a cortado
that was also
anymore.
thought, and I wasn't sure if you still were like, I'm drinking tea now versus
I drink coffee.
The amount of stuff. See, he's wondering if you're still drinking tea. This is
we should.
There's a level of like, I miss the banter. Okay.
What's the next question?
The next question. What is something specific to one another you have learned that you would not have learned had you not started this podcast?
How much Eric is on the phone, I think, has been a major theme.
Way to avoid the banter.
No, that's Did I actually like Andy? that is what I have learned over 2 years.
That's great. That was banter and a sincere. That was very
That's true. I mean, I didn't know when we started if I was going to like Andy. I mean, he and I were just doing the radio thing, and we hadn't even really met each other.
Know each other.
No, so
yeah.
I mean, and he had this, little church that was starting. I didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah.
He was a Presbyterian of some sort. He had Presbyterian heritage, and so that was.
So do you.
Yeah, but I mean, yours was more suspicious. At least mine was evangelical. Yours was just plain old PCA.
Oh man! Wow.
Yeah. He came from the foothills.
Yeah.
Anyway,
which when you know my story, is like not the thing that. That was me out of my element in the foothills.
Right,
but
well, that's why
good.
I got to know you. And I
right.
Like it.
Yeah.
Sorry, PCA people. I love you too.
Yeah, he does. But let's see. Yeah, I knew more. I felt I knew more about you, Eric, before we started this. So more than you probably thought you knew about me. But I don't know. It's just fun to get to know somebody's conversational like quirks and to see. I think I've learned like when you're the things you want to talk about and the things you don't want to talk about,
right?
And how you respond. Like you don't want to talk about this right now. I can tell just looking at it. I can just tell you don't want to
talk about how
the things you don't want to talk. You don't want to talk about the things you don't want to talk about.
I was thinking about try to figure out the things that I don't want to talk about. That's what I was thinking right now. What are the things that I don't want to talk about?
Yeah, you always want to. like the big social issue, like you're always just like, let's go women in ministry, let's go gay marriage. Like you're just like, yes, again, let's do it.
Yes.
And then I'll be like, I want to talk about, I don't know what.
War.
No.
War. Yes, you didn't want to talk about war, which I'm going, you want to talk about gay marriage, but you don't want to talk about war?
Well, we talk about war all the time on this podcast.
Do we?
Yes. There's
I
like
don't
3
know.
war podcasts.
Brian,
Well,
you would know. I don't know how many war podcasts there are.
In the beginning, before we talked about war, that was one that we didn't want to talk about necessarily. I wasn't even interested in the topic, actually.
Well, of course, because
But-
you're like the guy who won't talk about how you were in the military.
That's fair.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
some of it is I just haven't really. Yeah.
I think you two have killed people. And you don't want- I think there's something dark,
Yeah,
warlike in your past.
Yes, I'm.
When the
actually
podcast started, was
that bad.
Next question.
when the podcast started, there was a discussion early on about how the life of a pastor can weigh heavily. Has the podcast helped with that? And or even added to that? If so, in what ways?
I don't think it's been a heavy thing for me.
What, being a pastor or being on the
No,
podcast?
had the podcast.
You mean I haven't weighed heavily on you?
Not much.
It's more of like, how has it helped, if it has?
Well, it's an interesting thing to have a discussion with a pastor friend that you're also sharing with whoever wants to listen. So
Right,
it's not
it's weird.
It's not quite just sitting down with your friend, because we'll have a conversation after the mic goes off sometimes that's more like, here's a big thing that's going on that obviously we can't talk about on here.
Yeah, of course.
So but there's something about that too that keeps you from just going into the dark, gloomy stuff. So sometimes I think this has been good because it gets us talking about elements of being a pastor that are kind of in the middle. They're not utterly surface, but they're not like the deep, dark
Right.
stuff. It's in the middle, and that's where we often don't spend time.
Sure.
So I don't know, that I've actually really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think when we first started, I did not anticipate that this would be another form of pastoring my community.
But it
and
really is,
It has
yeah.
become a really effective way to let people in a little bit more into the way I think, and to see how I interact with other peers and pastors,
Right.
and and the cool part of it too, I've realized over the last few years that's been fun, is you and I have gotten so good behind the mic. I've realized in the sense of there's not a lot of ums anymore and likes anymore, and we don't breathe into the mic. And our conversation, like, we're not interrupting each other. It goes back and forth.
But there also aren't weird pauses.
Yeah, no, very comfortable with the way things work. So that's been fun because I'm like, we're kind of good at this now.
And there's a learning curve in that for sure.
And anyway,
so
So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It hasn't added a lot. I think it's had a great impact on my community, on your community. I love that I can go to your church and like 5 people will be like, "Hey, listen to the podcast. Ooh, I really like it."
Yeah.
And it's almost sounds like, "Oh, I'm known here too,"
Right.
and it's good, and I don't have to like
It's definitely
go out of my way to be known.
It's connected our churches
It
in a way
has.
that we didn't expect.
Yeah, I mean, people at our church refer to your church now as their sisters.
Yeah, I've heard the same. About
And,
the village.
kind
of like a sister church, and like, oh, cool. We never really. There's no formality there. It's just
No.
because you and I talk and share it. Yeah.
I'll show up in a dress one time though, just to represent your work at your church on Sunday. Say, hey, I'm just representing the sister church.
Look at me.
Look at me. We're gonna make this formal.
I'm your sister. Well, that'll be
Interesting. That'll change everything.
Yeah, we did have a guy in a dress at church last week. So
Awesome.
That's true.
Yeah,
sweet.
And other things, but yeah.
Oh, that's. I think that pushes past us. We've had football helmet with chained football gear during the service and a riff, so midriff exposed. So but dress we've never gone to that.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Nice.
Next question.
Has the podcast at the beginning of the day ever felt like another thing you have to do,
Sure.
but ended up being exactly what you needed?
It's felt like another thing to do sometimes, but not like I'm never dreading it.
Yeah, I don't dread it.
Yeah. And I remember referencing an old podcast, I'm sorry, but how whenever you're on vacation or sabbatical, like this feels like both, like you can claim this as work and you can claim this as like not work.
It was, I mean, I do a lot of these kinds of things. Like I'll start a project and then that project will become part of my community and my job.
Right.
And this was in the beginning just like, let's give it a shot. I didn't think it was going to last 3 years.
Right.
So, and I didn't think we would have 2 studios that we could work out of. So that's pretty cool. And it spawned another podcast in my own community.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and it's spawned one in ours as well.
Sort of. Yeah.
Yes.
We do one every 2 months or so.
It
was going to be one a month. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, quality over quantity is what the mission church
that's
is.
the mission church. That's when it comes to audio.
Yes.
Everything else, that's not so much.
When it comes to audio, like Mission Church is the sniper and the Village is the guy with 2 shotguns.
Right.
Coming through the front door.
Yeah.
That's pretty much how that works.
But when it comes to deep thoughts about anxiety, the Village is the sniper.
That's right.
And Mission Church just has a wrist rocket.
Do you guys listen to the podcast after you put it up, typically?
Sometimes.
Yeah, I listen to it all the time. Sometimes, at least once, sometimes twice if I really liked what we were talking about.
I like to hear how we come across. I listen to my sermons too.
Yeah.
So I not every time, but a lot, just to understand how I come across and
tweak it.
Accost myself like for all the ums and the likes.
Gotcha.
And I want to understand if it's a comfortable thing to listen to, because at some point when it's going along, I will find myself engaged or not, even though it's me talking, which is weird, but it's a thing that I'm looking for. Like, am I interested in this conversation or not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, I listen to my sermons probably 2 to 3 times.
Yeah.
And mostly, if I'm listening to old ones, it's sort of, what did I think about that particular issue? Because I've been preaching for 18 years, so I have a catalog. And the other part is just to try to improve presentation style. What do I need to do to communicate better?
Yeah, I want to learn about that stuff too.
I understand. Yeah. That's good. Would you say, has the podcast influenced the way that you engage normal conversation with people?
No. I don't think it's changed that.
No.
Obviously, the way that it has been impacting your relationships with your congregations. Like, what kind of conversations have opened up because of the podcast?
Yeah, people have followed up with me about a thing on the podcast. That's happened for sure. So that's it. I think it just goes along with it's a layer of discipling the communities that we didn't expect. I didn't expect to have as many follow-up conversations as I've had, that's been a really good thing. But I don't think it's changed the way I talk to people. For one thing, I mean, this almost feels like a little tutorial for doing pastor podcasts or something. Like, it's the way that you need to talk on a podcast isn't the same as the way you have a conversation with somebody normally. You do need to fill dead space. You need to kind of get after it. You don't just, you do a little less listening. Like, you're listening, but you need to be responsive. You need to jump in. You need to keep things moving. So it's a unique style of conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
And so that's something that I felt like I had to learn how to do this, and it doesn't so much have its perfect parallel out in conversation.
I understand.
Yeah.
Any thoughts with that?
No.
Okay. That's terrific. How have you made an effort to avoid talking about things because it's something you're hoping to talk about in the podcast?
No.
I didn't think that would be the case. What's been the biggest surprise of a subject that you didn't think you would talk about that's entered into the conversation in the podcast?
Everything having to do with gender and sexuality that Eric wants to talk about over and over. No.
I don't remember him ever being like, I really want to talk about this.
That actually probably comes out in like our text messages more, like when we're talking about topics or something.
Well, partly because our personality is I tend to want to be more controversial, and he does not like to ruffle people's feathers. So most of the topics he offers are not ruffle your feathers kind of topics.
Sure.
And all the topics I want to do are ruffle people's feathers, or let's talk about someone controversial, or let's, and they're the ones I get the most response from people. So.
Right. Did you? Whose idea was it to do Rob Bell, Jordan Peterson?
I think
it
so.
was
Brian
so
knows.
originally, you had recommended it.
Jordan
very
Peterson
early on,
was me.
and then-
You're pointing to people, and the listeners can't
Yes.
tell. Eric.
I was about to say, but then I didn't want to overstep because he was talking. So, Eric what's your name? No.
Jordan Peterson was originally mine, and it got shot down by him.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but then it's
true.
become a conversation in your church.
Right.
So
And
then
so
you felt
now we had to talk about
So if you want to know anything about Faith Over Breakfast, just email Bryan Betz directly.
Yeah, I have access to the email. Now, but I tried to not overstep by like reading those necessarily.
Sure.
And
Well, there's not a lot.
No, very true.
Email us
But
at faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com.
Yes, email us.
And
Yeah.
Brian will be there
Feel free-
too. And
feel
he
free
can
to ask questions, and
Come
I
on
can
now.
respond. I always consult Andy and Eric prior to, or I just like let it lie if I feel like I don't think that this is even because you've received emails before and I didn't reach out, but it's because I didn't read those
So
emails.
to the topics. Let me get back to the topics here.
So Jordan Peterson was mine, and then we had to do it when you decided. Rob Bell, I don't know. I'm always one.
Well, Rob Bell is coming to town, and
Yeah,
I think I threw that out.
Yeah, you threw that one out there.
And yeah, I mean those conversations have been. I've walked away going like, yeah, that was fine. I've told you this on the podcast before. Like I don't, and I'm aware that it's probably more effective to just always talk about the hot button issue, but that it sort of bugs me. Like I don't want to always I don't like it either when I'm out at if I'm out at a coffee shop and somebody wants to talk about church and all they want to know is like, what's your view on gender?
Right.
It's like, why is this the only thing?
Well, but I think my opinion is not like talk about the hot topics. I just think in the conversation, there's nobody like us talking about those issues.
Yeah,
and
I know.
Without laying our Bibles out and just giving you the biblical
Right.
defense. It's a conversation, and I think it's really great for our community here. I also think it's really great for our community to hear about silence.
Right.
And we make it controversial enough anyway because we tell people they need to be silent. And
that's the good balance is that our different desires for topics they're both happening, and it's rounded out. But let's be honest, all the ones I suggest like silence are going to get less listens, even though I think it's a really good conversation.
Yeah, well, unless I think the micro churches got a good number because I shared it. You shared it because that's not one that everybody's dying to talk about.
Well, and
because you shared it, it got more listens.
I'll probably share it in the same forum, and this is a forum of people who are interested in those kind of things, and so I'll probably share the silence one there too. But it's kind of like, who are you talking to right now, and where do you share it? So, Brian, we need to ask you to start sharing the podcast more often since you're so into it. You got to put it out there, man. You got to.
Well, maybe what we could do is we got I think we have from somewhere between 77 and 110 listeners,
like regular
listeners. So look, Brian, he wants to be our producer. So if you just slip him a few bucks every time you see him, and say this is for Faith Over Breakfast,
just drop a 20 in his
pocket.
pocket.
Drop a 20 in his pocket.
It feels like.
Then he can do more work. But if you don't give him the 20, then he can't do much. So
in certain circles, in certain areas, dropping money in his pocket might be inappropriate. That could be read the wrong way. Yes. That could lead to a whole nother podcast topic.
You don't need to drop it in his pocket.
Yeah, but
it'll make the website worth it for sure.
Yeah. And then on the other note, for those of you who are still tuned in to all this, share if you like an episode. Like it actually makes a huge difference. So I shared a topic that's one of the ones that people are normally going to go, what's that?
And it got 77 listens instead of regular 50 to 60.
Right, because I shared it in a group of people who are interested. So if you like an episode and you listen to it and go, wow, I like it, a great way that you can support our podcast is just to put it out on your social media feed that
Right.
this is a good episode by my friends. Give it a listen.
And you can listen.
It helps.
Yeah. And also when you rate us on iTunes in particular and Spotify, and you actually put a written review,
That makes a big difference.
Yeah, it helps create a bigger search engine for
Right.
us and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I assume that's not what you wanted to talk about, Brian. Let's move on to your next question.
I mean, one of the things that I notice is you both have effective means of bringing people in, and I think the professionalism that you kind of want this to have, but also the controversial.
I really
aspect
don't
of
want it to be controversial.
No,
I just want to talk about issues that are, I think, important.
prevalent. Yeah, like, and I'm sorry for using that word. I don't mean to. I
I used it. I just want to clarify that I'm not looking to be.
I know you're just not trying to be like, oh, edgy podcast, faith over breakfast. You know, I think that they both pull, and I do like the banter, but I understand this podcast is very much banter, and I apologize. But one of the things I was going to ask about, in terms of recent ones, I know that you kind of it's difficult to talk about the ones that happened like for the first year. But any recent ones, any episodes that you really, really liked that you wish people more gave a bit closer listen to?
Oh, man. What did we talk about last week?
Silence.
Exactly.
The sound of
I
silence.
actually, honestly, if you asked me to recount like what were the last 10, I could not do it. I could not tell you what they were.
I figured.
Yeah. So I think what I've heard a lot from people is that the Josh Harris one,
Yes,
and the
got
White
good.
Savior Part 1 got a lot of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't know, like I'm just looking through some of these. You know, our doubts and raising up leaders were really good.
Mm-hmm.
I think were really helpful for people. I think all of our podcasts are just really good.
I think it depends on what your. It depends. Sorry, things happening off the mic. It depends on you, and I mean, I think like certain folks, there are certain podcasts that would be really more helpful too. I heard one guy at our church, the Josh Harris one was really helpful because that's just that whole paradigm that was discussed, like the sexual prosperity gospel idea, I think was really helpful. I don't know that everybody in our church like that would have been as impactful, but for him it was. And so I guess I would assume that throughout the catalog there are a number that are just tailored well to certain folks. I don't know that I love one over the other.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but War was really good.
Yeah, I like talking about war. I think part of it's just trying to articulate a pacifist view is not an easy one for me.
Especially when that dynamic is still forming.
Yeah.
Well, which is why I like it on this podcast, because you're not just getting on here going like, here is the pacifist way. You're working out your thoughts that aren't complete. It's not this like perfect flawless system, which is the whole idea of this podcast.
Yes.
The only one who gave this podcast any thought today was Brian. The two of us walked in here and we're just responding. And that's what we wanted to do, was let people inside the head of some pastors who weren't trying to give the perfect answer and who were just kind of working things out. And I think that's missing. I think that type of dialogue isn't shared very often. It's either just like free form, completely unrestrained thought, or
bad Christian.
Or, but like among the pastors podcasts, or it's like, here is a thought or a truth, or we're going to work this out.
Right. Like, should I confront my pastor on his false doctrine?
Yeah. Yes,
it's
you
15
should.
minutes.
Here's 8 reasons why. And those are all like great. I'm sure those get way more listens.
They do.
Whoop-de-doo.
But that's
not what we wanted to do.
Different name on them.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, could you imagine if it was N.T. Wright and John Piper sit down for Faith Over Breakfast?
Sure.
That'd be like 10,000 listeners. And
like, what's the worst name of a Netflix show? Comedians in cars getting coffee, right? And it's, they're driving around talking, but it's Jerry Seinfeld,
right?
And other famous people,
right?
Yeah. Brian, hit us with another one.
So for the people that are considering that are in ministry and considering starting a podcast, what advice would you give that you think would have benefited you knowing going into it?
You should have a little bit of money. No, I don't know. We've never had any money. That's what difference.
Well, we had money and we just took it from our own resources to make things happen.
Yeah, we never made. We don't make any money.
We don't make any money. No, we don't. We just take money from different sources.
We take, not make.
From all three sources here.
No, I think. But you know what? I like why we do our podcast. I like that it just was because we genuinely enjoyed talking to each other.
Yes.
We were on this radio show and we realized we kind of wished we got to share some more of the meatier conversation that didn't get on the radio. And so we didn't start it to build this great platform for ourselves. We almost said if only people at our church listen, that's fine. That's primarily who does.
Right.
But I think what I would say would be that the ones that come across weird to me are the ones where it's like you're obviously trying to create a platform.
Right.
And so I would just ask you as a human being to not be a punk and just try to start your own platform. Like,
right.
Do something that matters because you actually care,
right.
Or have a conversation with somebody because you actually like to have a conversation with them. And if it's worth sharing, it'll work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I would suggest that you not do it at a restaurant with the circular microphone with lots of noise. But that was a
cool thought, right?
Great thought. Great idea.
It was part of the gimmick too.
It was part of the gimmick and it was nice. But I think invest a little money.
Yeah.
Make a little studio, make it listenable, because I think that was the big feedback that we got when we kept making the transitions to better quality audio. People were like, oh, it's so much better to listen to. And I think that is important. And I also think the other thing is make a podcast for your community. Don't worry about anybody else. Like,
maybe that's part of what I'm saying.
This is the new, people used to listen to your sermon on tape. They get the tape and they listen to it. People have been listening to your sermon now on, whatever, some iTunes. But this is sort of the new way of connecting to the pastor and to hearing what he thinks is for him to have a podcast so he can talk to his people. And I think that's important.
Yep. And what we mentioned earlier, which we've learned, which wasn't a plan, but was that if you want to build unity between churches, have the two pastors talk to each other and share it.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. And I think probably that's what this podcast has done that you and I did not expect.
Right.
Was to create both a unity and an affection for each other's church beyond you and I.
Right. Yeah. And it is.
And that's really awesome. And I hope, that continues to grow.
Yep. Same.
That was something that that was actually going to be the follow-up question, which was nice. And if you have any other thoughts about that. But one thing that I found helpful is that in terms of not just ministry going into podcasting, but people that want to be like a social media influencer, but they generally want they want to help people. They're not like, oh, I want to be famous. And I think that not trying to make it this whole big thing and just focusing on giving people another avenue for people to learn about you, that it's just another facet that they can take a picture.
Keep going.
Okay. So is this going to be a video? Oh,
what difference does it make?
Oh, whatever. So a train should come by any second now. So
all you have to do to make Bryan just stop in his tracks is
Okay, so what I was saying is, I had some friends that were being discouraged about that. I was like, well, I'm putting a lot of effort into my blog and stuff like that. I really want to help people, but sometimes it's a kind of a thankless job, and it's hard to get into that. But they're not in ministry, so they don't have that. They don't know how to navigate it. Not that people in ministry necessarily know how to, but without a proper support system or elders or etc. But I think that when you make it for your community and you have a community to communicate to and communicate with, then they're going to be like, I'm really benefiting from this. And then they can also correct you because you open that dialogue up. It's like, how can I make this more effective and more beneficial for you? And if that's a focus that you want to have in your free time to invest in your community.
And we've heard feedback on the podcast from our community, which has changed it.
Sure.
But another thing that I mean, maybe to the folks that you're talking about, Rod, Eric's co-pastor, said a couple times to me, like, leaders are people who have somebody following them. Like, are people following you? Then you're a leader. Okay.
Right.
So I think there are a lot of people who want to be a leader who don't have a following, and they think they're going to go make a podcast or a blog and people will follow. And I mean, maybe.
But it's pretty rare.
It's pretty rare.
You have to be, I mean, and it's usually you're a highly talented person and you get onto YouTube and you manage to attract people because of your high talent.
Right. And that can happen, but they don't.
But it's pretty rare. What happens, like you said, if you're a leader, people are following you. You're not a leader if people aren't following you. So if you are a leader of a small group of people, take care of them.
And do a podcast for them.
Right. Or just don't do a podcast unless you have enough people to...
I'm saying if you want to do a podcast, right. Do it for the people that are following you.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they will listen because, or some of them will, because you're their leader. So if you're not, and you don't have the following, like, don't be too crushed that people aren't flocking. There's a bajillion podcasts, and there's so much out there, right? It's just shocking how much content is available out there. Right. So the fact that they didn't pick you, it's nothing against you.
Right. You just have we're just one more voice in a gigantic swimming pool.
Right. And so the fact that we are still doing it for 3 years is because we have two churches who generally track along with what we're doing.
Right.
And so that's why we're still, otherwise we would have just, nobody would care what we have to say over breakfast.
Right.
Is there a topic that you are excited to talk about that you haven't yet just because you're trying to figure out how to introduce it?
No. I think after we've done like 106 episodes. This is 106th episode or something like that. There's a lot of subjects. I think, last week we covered silence. And I thought, this is the first time we've covered silence. And then I typed in silence as the title, and we have one about Donald Trump and silence. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, so we've already talked about...
I forgot about that.
We've talked about silence. We've covered a lot of topics. I think it would be cool once for us to break open our Bibles and show people how we look at Scripture or look at a particular passage so people could see what it's like to experience sort of our walk with God in Scripture together. That would be an interesting thing that we haven't done. But it's
just kind of like the Bible study, but a little more like, let's actually just work this out.
Yeah, let's just work it out together.
Let's do that.
That would be an interesting subject. But I can't think of much. I mean, we probably, as things come up, we'll talk about them. I think our culture is in a real tension with all of its political things. I'm sure we'll be addressing some of those and how to navigate them, especially as the elections coming up will in the next year or so.
But if we'll
talk.
It's like the politics thing is, it's just like, at least right now, you're just joining the fray of,
and that's why
it's all being said.
Right. Yeah. So some of it will be helping people navigate it.
Right. We need to pitch into that, but if that's all we did, it would be what else is new? I mean, I think we need to be talking about something else.
Yes, we should be.
A lot of other things, because Donald Trump doesn't rule the world. He's just happens to currently sit in that office.
Right.
So he doesn't get all our airtime.
Yeah. He gets very little of our airtime, but
right,
which is good. And then there's times I feel like a good time to talk about it, just like the Donald Trump in silence.
Sure.
What is a hope for the podcast moving forward?
Well, I think if somehow we were able to get a grant and pay an intern who would be willing to work on all our promotion stuff and actually make what is visible out there in the world more slick and reaching more people. Because I think what we have to say, it's great for our community, but I actually think it's really good for a lot of other people. And
I agree.
I would love to get it out there, but we also are
time for
that's
that.
Not. I mean, yeah,
and it's not. It shouldn't be a top priority for us.
It isn't.
If it was, it'd be we'd neglect them.
Basically, our priority is come together, talk, post it on our Facebook page, and send it out on a few little Twitter feeds that we have. And
they kind of just auto post, and it's like done. A quick motion, and it's over because we have other things to do.
Right, and if somebody wanted to put in descriptions and do, a regular weekly Twitter thing and do all that kind of stuff.
Edit it a little more or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, sure. That'd be cool.
But that's not where we're at. And
it doesn't have to happen. If it happened, that'd be cool.
It would be really cool. I mean, I think it'd be cool I'd love, 5 years from now to have 250, 300 listeners instead of 100 listeners.
10,000.
10,000 would be really weird.
That would be weird. I don't even know. What would if people were actually emailing?
What would we do?
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of work.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we're running into is we've got 106 episodes, and we don't have a lot of guests. And I think we enjoy talking to each other, and I think people enjoy listening to us talk together. But guests are what bring a broader audience because a guest has an audience of their own.
Yeah, and they share it on their platform
right.
as well.
And so,
Brian, you got to do that on your massive platform.
But I think you and I are not really interested, I think, in interviewing people.
I don't want to be an interview show.
Right.
Like that's the thing. Like part of this,
and I don't either.
Part of the thing is I'm fine with it being small because I don't want to turn this into this big, I don't know,
overly refined.
No,
where we've got to sit at home and be like, oh, what exactly do I ask? XYZ smart guy. I don't want to do that.
Well,
or if we do it, if we ever do it, no prep. Just you're coming on, and whatever happens, happens. And if you're not into that,
I hear you. I mean, I think on the other podcast I do, Healing the City, I do a lot of interviewing, and I love it. I love to interview people, but I don't want to do a show where I interview people with you. I want to just talk about stuff,
right?
Because I think part of it is me being able to work out things as much as it is you being able to work out things.
And I think what could be interesting would be if other leaders in our city and outside who wanted to have this type of we just sit down and work it out conversation, if they wanted to really do that, whereas there's no prep, you're not going to come in here with all the answers, and we're just going to put it on the table, and who knows what we end up asking each other. If somebody's up for that, I might be open to it. Yeah.
So speaking of podcasts and podcast length, I'm going to need to wrap it up here soon because I got an appointment coming. So
great. I need to write a sermon sometime today.
He needs to write a sermon. What are you writing your sermon on today?
What we reject as Christians and how.
Well, you just put a picture of Bryan Betz on this slideshow and it'd be good. What we reject as Christians. Bryan Betz.
Easy.
I'm not going to let that
done.
It's really and it's something that I'm used to. So it'll be,
stop. All this any negative thing about Bryan Betz is being. I am.
Well, no, because you do it. Then the next slide is things we accept, and then there's Bryan Betz.
Okay.
So they have to deal with the you know.
But then they leave before they even get to the next slide.
Oh, that's right.
But we're starting into 1 John 4, so it's test the spirits.
You guys are going to be in 1 John forever.
All year.
It's crazy. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Why now?
No, next.
It's I thought you had to go.
No.
Yeah, so that's what I'm preaching on. Test the spirits. We'll talk about that little concept for I think 4 weeks.
Wow.
Nice.
Different angles of it. So I'm talking about what we reject and how.
Right.
How about you, Eric? What are you doing? Are you preaching this week?
No, we have our belonging service.
Oh.
It's only an hour long.
Oh.
What's
Nice.
belonging service?
It's our membership service. We have it every year. So you have 2 ways to belong. You can either sign our covenant and kind of re-up for a year, say this is my community where I'm going to be discipled and be a disciple. Or if you're kind of in the process and you don't know where you're at in faith, or you just can't sign the covenant for some theological reason, but this is your church, you can belong by kind of participating in the community art project. So it kind of, you can still make a statement that this is your space and your people, but you may not be asking for the same level of accountability and discipleship.
That'd be an interesting thing to talk through. Like, what does it mean to belong to your community? That's at those 2 layers. I haven't quite heard anybody do that.
Yeah, no, it's pretty unique to the village. I would say I've never heard anybody else do that.
We should talk about that. Look, we just found 2 topics.
Yes, you're welcome.
So, all right, see you next time, everybody. Off we go.